Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution.
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 You want a revolution?
You say you want a revolution?
Revolution. The revolution.
It's going on right now.
Welcome to The Revolution, the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we ask today's most successful entrepreneurs to share the tools and strategies they use to build relationships and connections to grow their revenue. Now, your host for The Revolution, John Corcoran.
All right, welcome everyone. John Corcoran here. I'm the host of this show. And, every week I get to talk to smart founders, entrepreneurs, CEOs of all kinds of companies. Take a look at my archives. We've got some great episodes with, just recorded an episode with the founder of Kinko's, got Netflix, got YPO, EO, Activation Blizzard. This is part of our series focusing on top agency founders, top agency, digital agency owners. And I'm also the co-founder of Rise 25, where we help connect B2B business owners to their ideal prospects. And before we launch into this, I want to give a quick shout out to Carl Smith of the Bureau of Digital Community, who connected with our guest through that community. I'm a member of it. And our guest is Nancy Lyons. She is an entrepreneur, a founder, a CEO, author, speaker, passionate advocate for LGBTQ families. She's the author of Work Like a Boss, a kick in the pants guide to finding and using your power at work. And she lives in Minneapolis with her spouse and their son. And Nancy, before I go too far from Carl, I wanted to mention you've been a part of that community for a long time. And I know I've gotten a lot of value out of being part of, especially during COVID times, being part of different online communities where you can be with different peers and contemporaries. So what have you gotten out of the Bureau of Digital Community?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. I am grateful to you and grateful to the Bureau for these sorts of opportunities. I first met those folks probably, 10 years ago. I mean, it was a long time ago, and I am loath to join more things. I'm one of those people who is always worried about over-promising, and I have high expectations. And I wasn't really, I was a little reticent to join an organization full of agencies or studios sitting around talking about how great they were. And so I was a cynic kind of right out of the gate. But after a few opportunities to connect with folks who have issues, problems, learning opportunities that were similar to things that I needed to know more about or things that I was encountering myself. I found just an enormous amount of value in that community. And I'm grateful for it. I've made really good friends. I've connected with people that I admire and I learn from pretty consistently, and people that I could reach out to, at a moment's notice and ask for advice. So the Bureau has been, really instrumental in our growth and our success. And I'm super grateful for it. My entire leadership team is involved in the Bureau in one way or another. And it's something that I count on.
That's great. That's great. I want to ask you, I love to ask many of my guests how they started down the path towards entrepreneurship. And you've had your company for about 20 years now. Was it an organic thing? And what's your background with entrepreneurship? Did you grow up in a family with business owners? Were you out on your parents' lawn on the weekends doing a lemonade stand whenever you got the chance? What was that like?
Yeah. I think I'm an accidental entrepreneur in that I just sort of landed there. And I think most careers, unless you decide that you want to be a doctor, a lawyer, an astronaut, most careers happen by accident. And I don't think our culture spends enough time talking about that truth. And so I'm happy to say I just sort of ended up here because the internet was a space that I was enjoying exploring, and I met people who aligned with my values, and it happened the way it was supposed to. My business partners and I had a company before this that we sold. So we started more than 20 years ago when we were very, very small, tiny geniuses, tiny young geniuses. But, fresh out of college, two of my business partners worked for Prince. And that story is, we're based in Minneapolis, and a lot of people sort of touched the universe that was Prince. But as with so many self-taught technology folks, They were musicians, and Mike was a sound engineer and a producer, mixer, composer. Chuck is a graphic designer, and both of them worked for Paisley Park, and they really started to explore the internet as a result of Prince. And I was doing, marketing and industrial video production. And the company that I worked for was exploring internet technologies on behalf of clients. And so I started to sort of go off in that direction on my own. We were all really young. We came together. They started a bulletin board service, which was the early social web. And they did it on behalf of Prince. They were going to call it The Dawn and launch it for him to have direct access to his fans. But most people that know about Prince know that he's a little eccentric and unpredictable, and he was in this case as well. And he asked them to leave. He got irritated about something, asked them to leave. And so they took the technology they'd been working on, they plugged it in Mike's basement, and they started a BBS called Bitstream Underground, which ultimately morphed into an internet service provider, became one of the premium residential service providers in this area. And I joined them in 1995, 96. And we started building websites right around then too. First client was BASF. And we built that company and sold
I've interviewed
it in
a few people
2001.
I want to ask you about that. I've interviewed a few people that were doing web designs around that period of time, 95, 96. And it was totally the World Wide Web. I mean, the Wild West at that time, right? Like, the tools were not that evolved. We didn't even have WordPress back then.
Right. We were hand coding HTML, and, when I first started to learn to code, it was in Perl. And, most people have no idea what the heck you're talking about. And there were no content management systems. And most of what was happening there was pretty ugly. But we started right away calling ourselves a user experience company when the rest of the world was developing in Flash and creating entirely gorgeous, but possibly inaccessible, web properties. We just didn't. We never played in the dancing banana spaces. And I'm kind of proud of that. And it took a long time for even the language to catch on and for people to understand the importance of accessibility. But we have always been there. And that's where we started Clockwork. So we left the company that we sold and started Clockwork pretty soon after, with an intention to build a values-based business and build a place where we really wanted to work and create a place where other people could have, great lives too.
Yeah. Tell me about what conscious decisions you made differently when you founded Clockwork. Because on the surface of it, at least from my perspective, it looks like it's not that different. You had kind of a web design company before, and you're doing web design now, or an agency. It might have evolved and changed, but how did you decide that the Clockwork is going to be different?
Yeah, well, I think on the surface now it doesn't look that different. I think you're absolutely right in that regard. I think at the time it looked very different, how we wanted to run the business, how we wanted to articulate our values, how we wanted to build the business around those values and hire people that reflected those values. But also, I think very early on, before there was, any sort of cultural awakening or reckoning, which, one could argue has really only begun in the last year, we were really trying to embrace the tenets of anti-racism. And living in Minnesota and being, really wildly aware of how white we are and Minnesota is, it was something that we felt really strongly about. We were probably one of the first commercial businesses to come out very publicly to say that Black Lives Matter. And we recognized that there could be no separation between who we were and the work we did and what we believed. So some people would call how we show up political, but I don't think having humanity in your business is politics. I think it's a moral imperative. And I think that we were speaking to that long before there was this cultural shift that allowed for that kind of conversation.
Let's talk about that. You're in Minneapolis.
Mm-hmm.
Take me back to what the last year has been like. George Floyd was killed a little, maybe 14 months ago now, I think it was. We're recording this in the end of July of 2021. first of all, what was that experience like in the immediate aftermath?
Well, I think first of all, after Philando Castile, after Jamar Clark, after so many other names, it was not something that was unexpected. And that's the real tragedy of the conversation around George Floyd. Another man had to lose his life at the hands of those folks who are supposed to be protecting and serving. And my staff really took the murder of George Floyd very hard, and the destruction of our city as a result, just followed that with great sort of emotion. And so we were essentially closed for a period of time while our people showed up in the streets of the neighborhoods where they lived to help rebuild and clean up and traffic supplies and be available and provide protection and solidarity. And so it was a really, we were in the middle of a pandemic. And on top of that, this particular city was in the middle of a deeply painful and traumatic event. And so this last year, last 18 months has been, one of the hardest, lengthy experiences of our lives, if you're at all connected or aware. And it's not over. I think it's easy for the rest of the world to kind of move on. But it's not in Minnesota. And I think it's not, in particular in the Twin Cities, because not a lot of change has happened. So it's become, almost dramatically apparent that we can't count on our leadership to make the change that's necessary. And it's interesting to me because the parallel that I draw with the technology space is our entire existence is about experimenting. It's about trying new things and adapting to new technologies and being curious enough to want to teach ourselves and trying again and failing and learning how to fail well. And what I recognize about how state and local governments and beyond operate is they aren't familiar with the concept of failure or the concept of experimentation. So instead of doing anything, we're doing nothing. And I think that's really sad because, as I said to you before, after Jamar Clark, after Philando Castile, now after George Floyd, I expect that if we don't do something, it will happen again. And to me, that's the loss of those men is the greatest crime, but the crime that sort of comes up the rear of all of this is the fact that we aren't changing. Nothing has changed. Nothing, I think individuals are having personal, moments of realization and self-awareness and recognizing how they contribute to systems that were made entirely for them. But I don't know that the larger systems of government and leadership and policing have had those come to Jesus moments that are necessary to make real change. And it's hard to witness when you're in a space, when we are in a space that is nothing but change. I mean, I think the fact that we've been around for 20 years and had a technology company before that speaks to our ability to change.
Yeah. And
so I've sort of made it my life's mission to stand on the back of my little successful company and say out loud that nothing should get in the way of our desire to demand change and to push forward and to speak out and to speak truth to power and to influence the fact that something needs to happen.
What were those conversations like in the immediate aftermath within your company when people started to come back together? What was that conversation like internally?
Well, I think it was profound sadness and exhaustion. I am still dealing with the aftermath of all of it, not just the pandemic. And I was saying to somebody last night that I think the next great crisis we're going to deal with as a nation is a mental health crisis. And I believe that because I think we don't know how to talk about things or address things or make change or make space for mental health. And I believe that, I witnessed my staff go through a significant mental health crisis, and it was the pandemic. But on top of that, and on top of the isolation, and on top of the uncertainty, and what was the word we heard over and over, the unprecedented nature of, the impact on business, there was also this big moral question mark about whether or not we would come out the other side of this enormous tragedy better, if we would use it to really look at ourselves and determine what needs to change in the state, but beyond. I mean, we're just a microcosm, a sample of the truth of what's, reality across the country. And that is that, we are a nation made for white people. And that's just the truth. And I get that makes people uncomfortable. I get that people don't want to be racist. I get all of those things. And we don't have a language to address it. And we don't know, and white guilt is really problematic in the context of all of that. But it's true. And as long as we keep running from it, we're not going to fix it. And we need to fix it because the other day I was talking to somebody and they were talking about how Black and brown people have been deprived of certain aspects of our culture. And I said, I think you have to really be deliberate in how you articulate that. It's not that they've been deprived. It's not that they couldn't get it. It's that they were excluded. These things were not made for them. And we continue to operate in that reality without acknowledging that it's true. And that's that's the first step to admitting we have an issue, is just saying out loud and getting past our discomfort. It's unfortunate that people are uncomfortable, but
I want to ask you about what did you as a company, and are there any decisions or actions or changes that came out of those discussions then that happened in the aftermath of what happened to George Floyd?
Sure. One thing that happened immediately after is we just made space for people to do what they needed to do, whether that was show up in the streets, volunteer, clean up their particular neighborhood, stay home and sleep. Everybody reacted in different ways, and we really tried to honor those differences and make space for all of them. I think right now we're dealing with the continued exhaustion that nobody seems to want to talk about as we talk about snapping back to what we should be doing in the workplace. So right now we are actually experimenting with 4-day work weeks. And really trying to schedule around Fridays, not, making it a throwaway day, just scheduling around it, and giving people the ability to rest more. We are encouraging rest, even in how we built our budget, quite frankly. We budgeted with a target number of billable hours that is, I won't say significantly, but lower than what they were used to, because in our experience, if we don't make space for these people to rest and to, take care of their emotional bodies, we are going to be part of this great resignation that is on the horizon that people are already starting to experience. And that's just not something I'm interested in.
I mean, right now there's a lot of people changing jobs. Do you think that's part of it?
Absolutely. I think people everywhere are reprioritizing because our entire existence was staring us in the face last year, and we were tired and we weren't running around doing anything. So suddenly we really had to ask ourselves, how are we investing our time and what of it actually matters? And I know that I'm doing it. I'm trying to reprioritize my entire life so that I only do things that matter to me, to my family, to my community. Yeah. And I really need to practice the word no. And every day, I think people experience regret in their work lives. And we're trying to avoid as much of that as possible and give people the freedom to rest.
It sounds like in those discussions and the decisions that were made in the aftermath that you and your company see eye to eye from the way you're describing it in terms of how to respond and what decisions were made. But I want to ask, as a leader of your company, was there any tension for you in terms of how you manage the company going forward? And was there any, challenges where, maybe like, the rank and file in your company said, okay, well, we should all take the whole month off. And then you as a business owner, there's the tension of, well, we got to keep the lights on, guys. I'd love to do that. So was any of those sorts of tensions that happened for you?
Sure. I mean, listen, nobody wears the stress like ownership, right? And nobody experiences the realities of the business like ownership. So I do think that tension has always been there and probably will always be there. I think people, they're not thinking about it in the same way as I do, and they're not supposed to. But I do think that what we really shoot for is a good amount of transparency and a lot of very active conversation about the realities of the business so that we're all sharing the important information that we have to. So yeah, that tension exists. Absolutely. Sometimes, I mean, as a business owner, and actually, I know we're going to talk about my book, but it makes a lot of sense. Why I wrote the book makes a lot of sense when we start to think about this. And that is, everybody is accountable for the health and success of a business. It can't just be ownership, because that imbalance is, it's not healthy for anybody. Now, I'm not saying that the most minute details or the most, all of the stress that I manage, I should share with my colleagues. That's not productive. But I do think transparency
freak a lot of people out.
Exactly.
Guys, you don't know how many things I'm stressed out by right now.
It's totally true.
Yeah.
And my interest is not to freak them out, but give them a sense of how important their accountability is in terms of keeping their promises. So, this summer we're recognizing that, really simple metrics or targets for each individual to shoot for are the easiest ways to stay on the same page relative to what success looks like. Like if they know, the margins have to look like this for us to be healthy, and your target number in terms of billable hours is this, if they know that, those are the two things that they can keep sort of front and center as they work through the summer, and they can manage their schedules and their need for respite around that. And I think that's really critical. And I think their desire to want to be accountable is also critical, which is what I wrote the book about: personal accountability for how to show up and contribute to the health of the organization and the culture.
So I want to dive into the book, but before we do that, one last question on this line that we've been talking about. But, what has the response been from your clients in the aftermath of the George Floyd killing? And, with you making decisions about how you're going to run your business, did you get any kind of, feedback from them? What was that conversation like? Did you have to say like, okay, our team's not going to be available on Fridays, for example, because we decided, for our own mental health, we're going to have to take Fridays off?
Remarkably, most of our clients have been really positive about the shifts that we're making. And it's not terribly evident. It doesn't really impact them that much because those target numbers remain. So, it's not like they're getting charged for a day where we're not working. They get charged for the time that we work, and we collaborate with our clients on sprints and milestones. And so they understand what to expect, and we deliver on those promises. And really that's about our values. And we actually determine client fit based on those values. So when you know that somebody sort of shares that value set and they're similar to you in how they, not necessarily how they view the world, but how they value partnership and humans, when you're certain of that, it's easy to deliver those kinds of messages, and you can almost expect what the response will be. And the response from our clients pretty much across the board has been relatively positive.
Okay.
So that's the good news. They've all been, and immediately after, people were like, absolutely. And, I think you responded in the same way that most people across the country do, which is, oh, you're in Minneapolis. I think that takes on, like, we used to be known for how cold it is here. And now we're just known for being racist, which is tragic to me. And I think the eyes of the world are on, this little big city. And it's why I feel so strongly about us making some change and really working hard to lead the conversation versus continue to just react to it. And so I think there's an opportunity for businesses in this community, for leadership here, to really make an impact. And if the government, if the leadership of the city isn't going to do it, then businesses can. And I think a lot of businesses have shown up in ways that I really admire, to make some amount of difference when we feel wildly helpless.
Yeah. You mentioned about making sure that your clients are a fit in terms of your values. Talk a little bit more about that. How you screen clients to make sure that they're a fit for your values, your company values, and also, are there any stories that you can share where a client came in who you determined wasn't a good fit for your values, and how did you make that determination?
Well, there's some really easy ones to share with you anecdotally. We have said no to a large gun manufacturer who wanted to sell guns online. And, whether you see this as a political issue or not, my parents, proud gun owners, my father is a former police officer. And I think that we need to get a handle on how we manage guns in this country, not take them away, just get a handle on it. And so that was just a place where we decided not to go. We also had a company that had a store that sold, I would say, jokey sort of paraphernalia. I don't know how to describe it, but among the products that they sold was Nazi paraphernalia. That was a really easy no for us.
Wow.
I've been approached about building porn or soft porn sites. That was a really easy no for us. So those are easy ones. The gun one in particular could have amounted to a really significant amount of revenue, and we opted against it. So I think there are some glaringly obvious, folks that have approached us, and they've been really easy to just sort of decline. I think that the values piece really comes down to communication. It used to be that the web and digital was sort of an afterthought, and we waited until we spent all of our money on commercials or ad buys or whatever. And then we relegated, a portion of our budget to that digital component. And now I think, digital is your front door, and quite frankly, a good portion of your business. And so for us, it's really about being able to have honest, transparent, mutually respectful conversations with clients, because technology brings with it a whole lot of tension. I often joke and say, sometimes I feel like my job is to crush people's dreams, because they think anything can happen with technology, and certainly it can, but you have to have the budget to pay for that, and you have to have the team to support it. And the other things that we see inside of companies is when people look at their digital spend as an expense versus an investment, we probably have a ways to go before we know that we're going to work well together, because we're building, especially now after the pandemic, we talked a lot about pivoting, but what we haven't talked about is the sustained realities of those pivots and how people are rebuilding businesses metaphorically from the ground up in digital spaces and sort of redefining processes and rebuilding teams and recognizing what customer experience really is. And we need clients who can handle the good and the bad of those discussions and who can collaborate with us to solutions that are pragmatic for their businesses in the moment, but also forward thinking enough to recognize that evolution is coming and we're all moving, toward an increasingly digital world. And so I think our values are about how we communicate, how transparent we are. One of our values is we're fueled by challenge. Like, this stuff is hard and we need our clients to be up for the hard stuff too. They cannot expect us to tell them only what they want to hear. That's not to say we don't want them happy. We want our clients to love working with us, but in the same way that, the best relationships thrive on honesty and shared energy and mutual interest and respect, our best client relationships are really fostered from those same things as well.
I think it's fascinating, all the different industries that are evolving and changing, and, disruption's a cliched term these days, but that are really massively having to rethink the way that they do things. Do you have any, you don't have to give examples of names of companies, but examples of, types of companies that you've been helping to pivot during this past year, this pandemic, during the pandemic, and really reinvent the way that they work or the way that they engage with clients?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that we spend a ton of our time working in regulated industries. So very specifically healthcare and financial services. And some of them are older. I don't want to say stodgy, but because the people we work with are remarkable. I'm so grateful for the clients that we get to work with. But I do think
stodgy.
Yeah, I do think they're sort of enmeshed or immersed in these old ways of being and doing, and it's much harder to, be innovative. And what we're really trying to do is help our clients do exactly that, to innovate and think differently. And we also, we don't just deploy digital solutions. We also do strategic consulting. And part of that oftentimes is change enablement or product adoption, because our clients often think that if they spend the money on the technology, that alone will solve their problems, but it doesn't always work that way. And so we have to think differently about how we form teams, about how those teams function, about governance and workflow, and how we streamline those processes, because bureaucracy for bureaucracy's sake has gotten in the way of really good work at a lot of organizations. So we really come in trying to be solution focused in a holistic way and address some of those issues to build efficiencies for our clients so that the technology will succeed and their investment will pay off.
Interesting. So Work Like a Boss, a kick in the pants guide to finding and using your power at work. I love the title, by the way. So it's such a great title. For a book that you decided you were going to write about culture, such an interesting time for you to be writing it, given everything that happened in the last year. Many people say, the last year accelerated the movement towards digitization and remote work, 5 years, 10 years, whatever amount. So talk a little bit about first, what inspired you to write the book, which you decided to write even before the pandemic started.
Yeah, I was writing it the year before the pandemic, and it was released about 8 months into the pandemic, which was a real good time. But it was interesting to me, and I'll just share this little story, and it'll make sense in a second. When I first started doing press for the book, I asked a local paper, one of the big two, to look at the book and maybe do a review. And we got a rejection letter because that person said, how does this book make any sense now that the pandemic has forced us all to go home? None of this actually matters, which I felt like made my point, because this was a person who believed that culture can only happen in a place and that people were changing now and didn't understand the sense of place like you and I have right now. We're on a Zoom call, we can see each other, we are in a place, we are exchanging energy right now, and I'm participating in this moment, and my participation is my responsibility. And I think that's true for how work works. And I think that, just like we were talking about these old ways of working and thinking that impede progress inside of many industries or organizations, I think it's true of basically all workplaces. The thing that ruins work is not whether or not we have technology to call in for a meeting or Zoom into a meeting. It's how people show up, the energy they bring, the interest they have in each other, in, the end product. And I think that oftentimes, and I say this a lot, people abdicate responsibility for those things to leadership, but truly, each individual plays a role in how successful organizations, their services and their products actually are. And if they don't believe that and use that power for good, they're actually part of the problem. And, to the point that you made about how, all these businesses have pivoted, true. And I just got done telling you, I've been in the internet business for 25 years. And in that time, since the beginning of that time, I've been working at home, and flexible schedules and job sharing and trust have all been critical components of my business. But what I recognize, and what I've said to people as I've talked about this book in various instances, is, people would say to me, well, how do you get to make these statements? You don't work for a big company. No, I do not. I work for a small company, but we work with big companies. And honest to God, I don't know how the majority of them function. I don't know how they get stuff done. I don't, because wherever there are people, there are issues, and organizations don't know how to handle people issues. And we started trying with HR, but HR is really about the company avoiding litigation. And nobody is teaching the people how to be more human with each other and make space. Right now, DEI, as a result of the racial reckoning in this country, is a big conversation at work. Well, frankly, diversity isn't just about race or ethnicity. It's diversity of thought and ability. And I think making space for all of it is essential. And so I wrote the book, and I called it a kick in the pants guide, because I wanted individuals to pick it up and recognize themselves in parts of it and abandon those behaviors that aren't productive and don't contribute to the success of themselves and the organization. And some of those behaviors are judging each other. We've always had, my company has had, working remotely, working from home, flexible schedules since forever. And I always used to tell people, we can have those policies on the books, but if you make it difficult for other people to take advantage of them, then they're not true. And I would go inside of companies all the time as a consultant and recognize that while some of these bigger companies were really trying to embrace new ways of working, the reality was, Bob could have negotiated Fridays off and worked his 40 hours in the first 4 days. But if everybody else on Bob's team has demonized Bob for taking advantage of this opportunity, then Bob, then that policy isn't true. And Bob's not going to have a good time actually using this privilege that he's negotiated. And I think people ruin good ways of being and thinking because we judge each other. We make it difficult for each other. We can't handle change. I think change is a big, hardship for a lot of people. They struggle with it. They like things the way they've always been. It's not just toddlers that like routine. It's humans. We like things predictable. I like to drive to work when I like to drive to work. I like to be in my desk and eat my lunch at the time I like to eat it. I want you to sit there and I want to know what you're doing. And I want to be able to see it because your butt in that seat is what matters most to me, not the results of your energy. And so I really wanted to write a book that sort of pushes for that kind of healthy self-awareness that changes how people think and helps them to recognize their passive aggression at work and other ways of behaving that just aren't productive.
I'm interested in knowing, and maybe this is a hard question for you to answer, but, as the owner of your company, it's one thing to say to your employees, okay, you need to act like a boss. You need to make decisions like you're a boss. But where does the rubber meet the road? Like, in other words, like how does it play out? Are there examples of decisions where another company, like the owner would make that decision, but in your company, you decide that the collective mass of people need to make that decision? Does that make any sense?
Yeah, sure. I think, at the end of the day, it's not a democracy. It's I joke and say it's a benevolent dictatorship. But I think that what I want for this company is for people to know that their voices have power and that they are seen and heard and that they influence. My job, and I always tell them this, is to protect the mothership. I have to make decisions in favor of the mothership. So it can't be about making everybody happy, because that's not sustainable. But I am looking to create, as in my work, I'm looking to create an optimal experience for everybody. So it's important for me to understand people's perceptions and behaviors and expectations so that I can weigh those, and my leadership team can weigh those when we're making decisions that are optimal, that we hope are optimal. And I think it's important for us to understand people's perceptions and needs and wants and limitations when we are experimenting with trying new things. So I think that the way it manifests in my company is people know they can talk about what they want or what they need, and people know they can try things and they won't be, penalized. We're not a punitive organization. We're not going to make people pay for mistakes. We're open to failure as long as we learn from it. And the next iteration, which is how we work, right? Like if we're working in an agile way, we are iterating to a better product. I feel that way about the company.
Do you find with the type of business that you have, where you're client focused, you're helping clients to, embrace digital, that it was hard to find something that you can rally the team around? So, I'll give you an example. So within our company, it helped for us when we got clear on what our mission was, and said that our mission was to help other companies to build great relationships through podcasts and content marketing. And we found that helped with the team, with culture, with hiring, that sort of thing. Do you find that is, I guess I'm struggling to come up with a question around this, but is that something that were you able to rally everyone around a particular mission, or is it a lot of different things at once?
Well, I think the mission is nuanced, right? When we start, we have the same mission as we did when we started, that we wrote on a cocktail napkin and we talked about who we wanted to be. And this was 20 years ago. And the mission was and is do great work, have great lives. And we wanted there to be a balance. At the time, I think agencies were notorious for chewing people up and spitting them out. I think they were notorious for, being a little precious and having, it's the creative directors or the people at the top of the food chain who make all of the big decisions and get all of the glory. And we really wanted more balance. We wanted to create more opportunity for people. We wanted to allow people to have voices and be able to express their ideas at every level of the organization. So do great work that we could be proud of made great sense, but also have great lives. Like we'd worked in places that honestly didn't care much about us. And we wanted people to feel like no matter what, we always care about them. And I think that over time, I think pretty immediately, but over time, we've achieved that. And I think people know that to be true. That being said, I can't make work not suck sometimes, right? And that's a point that I make in the book. Like I think we have this tendency to believe that, well, that other job will not be like this, or that next opportunity will be better, or if I have this title, or if I'm making this much money. And the truth is, any of us who have been around for a while, and I've already admitted that I'm old and have been around for too long, any of us who have been around for a while know that the grass isn't greener, it's still just grass. And so what are you going to do? Like, it's not somebody else's problem if you're not finding fulfillment or enjoyment. What are you going to do? Maybe it is another job, but maybe an attitude shift or a shift in mindset where you are will actually be helpful in allowing you to find some amount of fulfillment in the work that you're doing.
Well, Nancy, this has all been really interesting. We're running short of time, so I want to ask one final question, which is, I'm a big fan of gratitude. So if you look around at your peers and contemporaries, however you want to define that, who do you respect? Who do you admire that's doing good, interesting work that you really respect and admire?
Yeah, it's hard to think about just one person, but I'm going to share, actually, if you don't mind, I'm going to share a couple of names with you.
Yeah, that's great.
One is my colleague, Jenny Holman, who's been with our company for, 13 years, maybe 14 years. She's a senior vice president, and she is the person who leads client success and really influences delivery. But what I will say is, in a time where people leave organizations and jump ship for titles and pay and status, loyalty is something that I don't know that we value in the ways that we should. And I have some wildly loyal, but really smart, competent, capable human beings on my staff. And Jenny just comes to mind as one of the strongest and people that I'm most grateful for. And she is so focused on making Clockwork a better place all the time and doing exactly what her job requires of her, which is steer us toward successful client relationships and work product. So I'm super grateful for Jenny. I learn from her every day, and she seems unflappable, which I am not. And then another person that I really admire out in the world, well, there's just so many. We have a client, Melanie Shirley, who before the place where she's at right now, she was at a company called Learner's Edge. She has followed us, in all of the iterations of her career as she's advanced in her career and taken on more challenging leadership positions. She's been wonderful to us and picks us every time. I have another client who does the same thing. And I'm thinking of those clients in particular right now, because loyalty in a time of uncertainty cannot be undervalued. It is such a tremendous gift to have staff that are loyal and really truly interested in the health and well-being of the organization, and clients who really value the relationship enough to continue to work with us in all of their iterations.
That's great, Nancy. Thank you. Work Like a Boss, a kick in the pants guide to finding and using your power at work is the name of the book. Clockwork Interactive is the name of the agency. Where can people go to learn more about you?
Well, they can go to clockwork.com first and foremost. You can find out about the book at worklikeaboss.com, and you can find out about me and the speaking that I do and the writing that I do at nancylyons.com. And thank you, John, for including me in this crazy list of guests that you have. Such important, interesting people that you interview. I'm honored to be on the list.
Oh, it was a pleasure. And it was a fascinating discussion. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast with John Corcoran. Find out more at smartbusinessrevolution.com. And while you're there, sign up for our email list and join the revolution.
Revolution.
And be listening for the next episode of the Smart Business Revolution podcast.